As a great man once said, hexagons are the bestigons. So if you're going to look me in the eye and tell me you combined Fire Emblem Path of Radiance, arguably the best Fire Emblem game ever made, with hexagons, well then you have my attention. My name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and welcome back to the channel. Hello everyone, if you enjoy what I do, including my coverage of indie turn-based strategy RPGs that clearly take some inspiration from Fire Emblem, but inject a lot of their own creativity into them, then I like on this video a subscription to the channel and consideration of checking out my Patreon and my YouTube memberships will be very much appreciated. If you would like to support in any way, you can find the links to my YouTube memberships and my Patreon in the description down below. Thank you so much to everyone who chooses to support now and everyone who has been supporting for this strangely long ride that we've been on. I can't believe we've been doing this as long as we have. So, today we are covering Those Who Rule, one of the more interesting turn-based strategy RPGs done by an indie team that I've seen in a good long while. Now, as I said in the intro, this is definitely Path of Radiance meets hexagons. And that might be a weird statement to make, but trust me, I've never played a game other than Path of Radiance itself that feels more like Path of Radiance than this. And of course, those of you who are maybe not as familiar with Fire Emblem as I am might be wondering, well, what does that mean? Well, we're talking menus, we're talking characterization, we're talking character sprites, etc., etc. This is the most FE9 game that I have played that is not itself FE9. But we're not just looking at a generic clone here. Oh no. Those Who Rule introduces a ton of interesting mechanics to the genre that I honestly would love to see incorporated into other titles in the genre, both the indie style and double and triple A style as we go forward into the future of turn-based strategy RPGs. So what makes Those Who Rule so special? Well, there's a number of different categories. A lot of very interesting gameplay mechanics, very nice, almost grimdark art aesthetic. I wouldn't quite say it goes that hard. We're not talking like bloody, beaten up characters, but a lot of shading and a lot of very nice, not very anime style art aesthetic, which is something that is fairly rare for the genre and which I very much appreciate as a breath of fresh air. Very interesting different class combinations, job skills, map layouts, and of course, the fact that this is a hexagon-based system, which is not something we're very used to seeing in a very square-dominated, chess-like genre. So with all that glazing out of the way, what exactly does Those Who Rule do differently? And I mean, do you want me to talk about the fact that characters have zones of control like you're playing D&D? Or what about characters being able to get backstabs with piercing weapons like swords, being able to deal bonus damage with backstabs? What about flanking bonuses? How about block from having shields, points that actually regenerate over time? What about first strike for certain weapons? The ability to completely negate defense bonuses, block bonuses, etc. Maybe you prefer more meta examples like side objectives that require certain characters to do certain things during a given mission that will not only unlock new dialogue with other characters that gives more characterization to your favorite units, but also potentially gives them bonuses or items and weapons and other types of rewards that you can use to boost your army. There's a lot of different things going on here under the hood, which is a big part of the reason that I immediately got sucked into Those Who Rule. So in no particular order, here's exactly how some of those systems work. First of all, the whole zones of control system. This is one of the biggest reasons why the hex-based system in Those Who Rule is so important. When you are locked in to the immediate zone of a given enemy unit, or when an enemy unit is locked into your equivalent zones, your movement is extremely restricted. For those of you who are familiar with things like D&D 5e, Basically, this is equivalent to once you get into melee combat with something, if you want to try to leave said combat, it's going to take the entirety of your action. In Those Who Rule, you can only move one space, and that's basically going to use your entire action. Maybe you can attack something that's directly next to you, but you're not going to be able to do anything else. This means that positioning and having good control over the areas around your units to prevent things like flanks or being locked down by advantageous enemies is going to be massively important. It also means that keeping certain more squishy, vulnerable types of characters safe, such as archers, clerics, things like that, will be much easier to do if you're able to intelligently place your forces to form a battle line. Finally, it means that actually pushing up with a tanky unit that can take a bunch of hits and moving into the engagement area is a good way to phrase it, of enemy units, can lock those units down and potentially create a barrier that other enemy units will not be able to pass through. Think of things like Rampart Aura from Tactics Ogre, and you have a sort of similar-ish effect, because when you move into a unit's zone of control, the hexes that are directly in front of them, they will no longer be able to pass through those hexes. They will be forced to stop. This means that one unit can potentially hold down a much wider area than they would be able to in other equivalent styles of games, and that means you have so many more defensive options at your disposal, while also having so much more that you have to pay attention to as you move around the map and engage different squads of enemy units. This is where a second major component comes into play: backstabs and kind of consequently flanking. So, depending on where you are attacking an enemy from or where you are being attacked from, the attacking unit will get certain bonuses or negatives that reflect your positioning. For example, if you're attacking someone head-on, it's a direct stat-to-stat contest, just like something you would see in, say, Fire Emblem, right? How much attack do you have versus their defense? How much speed do you have versus their speed, etc. Very standard. If you're familiar at all with this genre, this is exactly how you would expect these types of combats to play out. However, if you're able to attack from the side, you're going to get an accuracy bonus. Maybe if you have an ally flanking, you'll get a damage bonus or be able to negate different counterattacks, things like that. If you're able to attack from directly behind, now we're looking at huge bonuses. No chance to dodge, no chance to block, increased damage. It's a massively advantageous position to be in, and it means that actually being able to get the flank on your opponent and having intelligent positioning so that all of your units don't get locked down in an enemy's zone of control will equal huge damage bonuses for you, and I love that. Combine that with the special skill of swords in general that give them a bonus to their damage when you're backstabbing, and you can start to see how having certain types of characters, even tanky characters with a sword and board, having the opportunity to get some backstabs in, it could be massively advantageous for you. Of course, swords are not the only advantageous weapon type to have, because we have swords, we have axes, we have lances, we have bows, we have two-handed swords, axes and lances, etc., etc. And each of these different weapon types has a different advantage associated with it. Spears, for example, get the very powerful first strike ability, wherein whenever you are attacked, if you are wielding a spear and your opponent is not wielding a spear or another weapon that has the first strike ability, you always get the first attack in. So, if you have a tanky character that, say, has a one-handed spear and a tower shield, holding a line against a bunch of enemies, any of those enemies who are already weakened will either die trying to attack you because you'll get the first attack in, or at the very least will get even more softened up before they're even able to take a swing at you. Axes are also interesting for their ability to bypass things like block and defense, so they can just deal direct health damage to enemies, which, when you're dealing with really tanky, heavily armored, tower shield wielding enemies, can be massively advantageous for just punching through what is otherwise an insurmountable wall. And again, given the whole zone of control thing where you can't just bypass certain tanky enemies, you're gonna need the ability to blast through those kind of roadblock style opponents. Then, of course, we do have things like bows, and I do love bows in Those Who Rule, specifically because they do have more than just 2 spaces of range, right? It's not like you can't attack in melee range and you can attack 1 square away unless you have a longbow, in which case you can attack 3 squares away, like in most Fire Emblem games. You actually always have minimum 3 squares of range, except it's hexes, so sometimes that range is even further than you might expect it to be. Combine that with the fact that you are able to completely avoid any sort of counterattacks against enemies, even if they are also wielding a bow, and it suddenly feels a lot more advantageous to have some archers in your party. Of course, these are not the only mechanics that are available. You have all sorts of other fun things like abilities, say the ability to use a healing spell on an ally to boost some of their HP, or a kick or a shield bash to get some free damage in that is relatively low damage but doesn't provoke a counterattack, and can get you other bonuses like preventing an enemy from blocking or moving particularly far, etc., etc. You also have a bunch of different weapon modifiers, and the Forge, which again, if you're familiar with Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn, should be something that is quite familiar to you, where you can boost specific stats for your weapons to really kit out a specific build for your characters. And given the fact that over time you are more likely to find more specific weaponry with their own specialized bonuses and abilities as compared to like your standard iron or steel gear, this means that you can really kit out a character with weapons that complement their playstyle. And considering the fact that even between different classes, you can have, say, a skirmisher that has a sword and a shield versus a skirmisher with a two-handed sword, and they do play very differently, having the ability to kit out different weapons and forge them in different ways is going to be really powerful for your ability to build craft. And that's even before we get into the fact that you can apply different modifiers to weapons, like say, hey, maybe you have an archer, right, who has particularly bad strength. So her bow doesn't really deal good damage. But for whatever reason, she's really tanky. She has a lot of endurance. She's a rustic country gal, you know, and she just has a lot of stamina and she can go for days, if you know what I mean. Well, give her a modifier on her bow that makes it so that that bow uses her endurance stat when calculating damage rather than her strength. And suddenly, now you have an archer that's going to deal a whole hell of a lot of damage and also happens to be decently tanky and have good speed. And that's going to boost her damage output massively. And that's just one modifier. You have modifiers that make you deal increased damage when an enemy has full health or when an enemy has less than full health. When an enemy is flanked, you can add more weight to your weapon to have it deal more damage, so your tanky characters that aren't particularly fast to begin with can just hit harder in general. There's a lot of different options here, and that's just the stuff you can buy from the shop. You don't even know what different things you're going to find for completing certain side objectives or completing support-based side quests, etc., etc. There's a ton of different options here, and I'm only on like mission 6 in Those Who Rule. I'm nowhere close to finishing the game, but I already have a wide breadth of options available to me, and my little build crafting heart loves that. It's so cool. Finally, one other mechanic that I really want to cover here with Those Who Rule is that block meter, those block points we've mentioned in a few other points leading up to this. And what's cool about this is actually a reason to care about whether you're using a one-handed or two-handed weapon, as well as if you have different styles and types of shields and what they can do for you. So, how does this work? In Those Who Rule, if you have a shield, you will get a certain number of block points. Smaller shields, like bucklers, will get a lesser amount of block points, whereas larger shields, like tower shields, will obviously get more. Alongside this, they do have different weights, so having like a tower shield will mean that you can carry less other heavy weapons or accessories or the like, but on the flip side, a lighter shield is of course going to not have as much opportunity for you to absorb damage. This is important as if you're taking an attack from the front or the side, any damage that is applied to your character will be applied to their block points first before it punches through to their HP. Every turn, you'll restore a certain amount of your block points, typically half, although depending on your class, you might get all of your block points back at the beginning of your turn, or even after every action, which is absolutely insane. And as you can imagine, for frontline characters, this is going to massively extend their capability to survive on the field of battle. And in any game like this that has a classic sense for permadeath, that is going to be massively important. In terms of fighting enemies, block hasn't been overly oppressive for the most part in my time with the game. However, on my most recent mission, Mission 6, I did start to encounter some promoted enemies that would again restore all of their block after every combat, and that made me heavily reevaluate how I was going to approach fighting that type of enemy, as most of my damage with most attacks was being completely negated. Things like backstabs and axe-wielding characters became massively important here for taking these enemy characters down in a timely manner, which, considering I was on a mission where there was going to be a lot of enemy reinforcements spawning in, became very, very important.
So artistically, I love this game. I've mentioned before how really nice and almost grimdark all the character portraits are. I'm absolutely in love with them. I think they are phenomenally well done. And the music itself really caught me as well. I mean, when you first open the game and your main menu has this like hardcore, almost heavy rock theme, I was like, hell yeah, dude, this is 150% my jam. And then the rest of the actual map themes and bass theme, conversation music, etc., has a good wide range. It's not all going to be hardcore rock all the time. That'll get tired, but it is a good wide range of more instrumental, almost Irish, Celtic, Nordic-esque inspiration, which I really enjoy, and is not something that I'm super familiar with in the genre most of the time. I also really enjoy the juxtaposition of the 3D animation, these kind of blocky, I almost think like RuneScape-esque character designs. It's very different from the character portraits, but I do kind of like that, and it allows for very dynamic animations and interesting world maps without being super graphically intense, which for a project of this size would of course be absolutely crippling if they really tried to lean into it. So I like that they have this more simple polygonal style that is very nostalgic for me as an old school gamer, but I think does still work in the modern era as well. All the menus and backgrounds for different conversations, the base, etc. are beautifully designed as well. Again, extremely nostalgic, a lot of Path of Radiance energy here, which I very much enjoy, and does actually make things stand out very well. Everything is very readable, it is very easy on the eyes. I didn't feel like I was being strained navigating through menus the way you can in some games if there's kind of a mismatch between colors and art style and font and all that good stuff. As far as the story is concerned, I've definitely been interested thus far. You quote-unquote play as three main characters who are recruits to the Rangers, the local kind of spec ops Kingdom Defense Force that's a little separate from the main army. They have a lot of autonomy, kind of think of the Spectres a little bit from Mass Effect, but with a bit more oversight from things like nobles and the ruling council and all that type of good stuff, but definitely a whole lot fancier than your standard foot soldier, and as such, you have a lot of room to recruit a lot of interesting, shall we say, characters, people who would not fit in to a standard army. However, this means that you do also come into conflict with some of the nastiest work, and that's where a lot of the initial plot comes into play, with some of your characters, such as Ilyana, expressing concern over the handling of bondsfolk and the more common field workers, how they're being oppressed and made to pick up a sword and fight when they really shouldn't have to if they were being treated appropriately. This is a fairly standard plot point for a lot of games like this, but I do find that it's handled in a very interesting way here, as it actually does impact your gameplay through some of those side quests that we've talked about. For example, there's one mission where to complete the side quest and get your reward, you cannot kill a single character because they're all bandits, quote unquote, that are actually just like bondsfolk and field workers who are, again, fighting for their right to like have some time off and some food for their families. And you cannot kill any of them with Ilyana because she herself was a bondsperson in her younger years. This is a problem because Ilyana, up to this point, is far and away your most capable fighter, basically always being able to get double attacks, dodging attacks, and dealing high damage overall, so you've gotten very comfortable with having her on the front lines. Trying to complete this side quest and having her not kill anybody in the process dramatically changes the way that you're going to play, and it actually makes it feel like this particular story beat is a truly important, mechanically relevant moment in the story. And characters do react to it as well. That's something that I love so much about the story writing and the character building in Those Who Rule. Characters do actually comment on these things. One side quest involves your healer being forced to go out and kill a bunch of enemies because she's been neglecting her training. And having the ability to heal and maintain her allies won't mean anything if she can't defend herself or adequately wield a weapon to protect an ally to then be able to heal them once the threat has passed, right? So you have to go out of your way to get a bunch of kills with this character who is otherwise not very physically competent. If you do so, you get praise. The characters actually discuss it. If you successfully don't kill anyone with Ilyana and protect all of the bondsfolk who are still your enemies and still trying to kill you, she will get chewed out for it by other more seasoned warriors who understand what it is that she's going through, but also acknowledge the fact that she's not going to be able to help anybody if she dies at the end of a desperate man's sword. There's a lot of cool writing moments here with that, and while I don't have a ton of insight into how the overall story is going to develop, these smaller character moments and this level of world building definitely makes me intrigued. There also seems to be a little bit of player choice capability at play here, and this is something that I'm kind of curious about, how much you actually get to control things. For example, in the tutorial mission, you're given the opportunity to hang up your sword and surrender when you get caught in an ambush, or to draw your sword and go down fighting. Now, very minor spoilers for like the first chapter of the game here. I chose to go down fighting, as it seemed like what the character I was controlling at the time would do as a general of a nation, right? He's not just going to give in to people who have broken a treaty and ambushed him, right? When I next saw him, he was being held prisoner, and as a result of his actions or the choices that I made for him, one of his hands was lopped off. Now, I don't know if this is going to mean he comes back into the story later, maybe in a diminished position, not able to fight as well. Maybe if he winds up being a recruitable character, he'll have like a different class or lower stats or something. I don't know, but I am very curious to find out. Given the fact that you can have these different character moments and development and conversations based on whether you complete these side quests or not, and that you can get some different rewards and some different outcomes based on choices that you do get to make during missions, I'm very excited to see if these really do wind up being options that have long-reaching consequences going forward. Something that would encourage you to maybe play the game multiple times to see different outcomes. I don't know if that's the case, but the potential is definitely there, and I would love it if it does exist, because I'm a sucker for that type of stuff. All told, I am absolutely in love with Those Who Rule. If you are someone who is definitely into a classic old school style strategy RPG, Fire Emblem campaign-based single-player experience, I highly encourage you to check this one out. You have all the different modern amenities, like different difficulty levels, the ability to turn on and off your permadeath and things like that, even different ways to handle not having characters permanently die, but maybe getting stat debuffs, or maybe just coming back perfectly fine at the end of missions, all sorts of fun stuff like that. But things are also more hardcore in a lot of ways, like no mid-battle saves or rewind mechanics. So you can decide for yourself whether that's something that you're excited about or something that turns you off. But one way or the other, if you have Steam, you have a PC that can play this game, which most PCs should be able to do, go and check it out. I think there's a lot here that you would really enjoy. I, for one, absolutely cannot wait to play more of Those Who Rule. Depending on my experience with the rest of the game, maybe it's something that we'll stream. I'm definitely interested in doing more videos about it as I discover more of its mechanics and how it can kind of play into and help to evolve the strategy RPG genre in general. And I would love to be able to do some deep dives on its characters and its mechanics and everything going forward as well, because I think there's some good stuff to discuss here. If you have checked out Those Who Rule, or you decide to check it out after you watch this video, please do go into the comments and leave your thoughts below. Is this something that looks like it would be up your alley? Is it something that you decided to go check out? If you did, what was your experience with it? What did you like? What did you dislike? What are your overall thoughts? I would love to have some conversations with you all, especially given how excited I am about this one. And of course, thank you to the developer Eldon Terulia, not only for giving me a key to the game, but for making such a cool game. I absolutely can feel the passion as another lover of turn-based strategy RPGs, and I hope that you have a lot more to provide for the community in the future, because I will definitely be there to support it. With all that said, though, I'm going to wrap this one up here. My name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there. And remember, be good to each other, everybody. Bye now.